This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning, Rabbi. We're learning Sefer Ezra, Parak Vav. We just learned Pasuk Yud Ches, where it's talking about the return of the Jews in the times of Darius, in times of Daryavesh. We pointed out last week the irony and the Hashkacha Pratis of how Achashverosh is celebrating a Suda that the Beis Hamikdash is not being built, and at that very same Suda, the Rebbe Shalom is putting into play Queen Esther, who between Achashverosh and Esther they would produce Daryavesh, and who would in fact give the permission to build the Beis Hamikdash. So last week we learned in Pasuk Yud Ches how the Kohanim and Leviim returned to their posts. Rabbi Yosef was medayik that it says Biflo Goshain by the Kohanim. By Leviim it says B'machla Kosain, and the Malbim points out that's because the divisions of Leviim were more specific than the divisions of the Kohanim. Okay, so now we're up to Pasuk Yates. So again, I just want to point out that under what year of the reign of Daryavesh were the Jews returning?
Second or the third. We had them focus like 2.5, right? That's when they started building. It was either at the beginning of the second or 2.5 years. Didn't we have that discussion? So
we learned that we're going to see Daryavesh gives permission, I believe, in the 6th year of his reign. Well, if you look in Parak Vav Pasuk Tesvav, it says V'sheitzi Baisa Dina. This house was complete ad Yom Tulasa Lirach Adar, on the 3rd day of Adar. So that's very interesting. Tomorrow, that's tomorrow. That the second Beis Hamikdash was completed tomorrow. And which is the 6th year of Daryavesh the king. Now we have to know, is Daryavesh a Jew or is a guy? And Rosh Hashanah we'll see more about that in upcoming Shiurim on the Megillah. But Daryavesh's mother was Esther. So if Daryavesh's mother was Esther, that means Daryavesh was a Yid.
Didn't we had I think it was here.
Yeah.
Didn't we have a medrash that Esther never had, was never over?
There's an opinion that she sent a shade, but simply put, the mother was Esther, and he was a Yid. Now, very interesting. We'll see in a bit, but we know there's a difference between Jewish kings and non-Jewish kings in terms of counting their reign. The kings of the Umayis Ha'olam. B'yachad b'Nisan Rosh Chodesh L'Melachim. But I believe that's for Jewish kings. For Goyish kings, it's B'yachad b'Tishrei. Okay? So that means for Jewish kings, they start counting their years the first day of Nisan, which means that if they started their reign in Adar, already a month later, it's the 2nd year of their reign. Masha'en Kain, non-Jewish kings start their reign in Tishrei. So a non-Jewish king, if let's say they started in Elul, a month later they would be in their 2nd year already. Now, we have to see, is Daryavesh, are we considering him a Jewish king or a non-Jewish king? Well, he's a Jew, but he's definitely not, it's not a Jewish monarchy, because he's ruling over Paras. So we have to see, actually, if you look in Sefer Chagai, there it's certainly counting his years from Chodesh Tishrei, which would indicate that we're considering him a non-Jewish king. However, we're going to have to see, because so far all we know about Daryavesh is in the month of Adar, on the 3rd day of Adar, which is tomorrow, it was the 6th year of his reign. Now we're in Nisan. Okay? Now Nisan is what? If he'll be a Jewish king, it'll be the 7th year. If he's still a guy, it's still the 6th year. Okay? So, look in your Pasuk Yates. Vayas b'nei hagoyla sa Pasach. The b'nei hagoyla brought the carbon Pesach. B'arba asar, on the 14th. Lachodesh harishon of the 1st month. Now that's very important to know. Now, if they that means they were tahar. Now, that means they purify themselves from any tamei mace. That means they had the ashes of the paraduma. So this is a clear indication. In the times of the Bayesheni, they had the ashes of the paraduma. In fact, Ezra himself, I believe, made one of the paradumas. But this is not strange at all, because actually we find in Shas that even the Amoraim had the ashes of the paraduma. Okay.
So this is also an indication that they must have had the Chanukah bias already, and they were using the Mizbeach.
Yeah, correct.
So that's the case.
Now we know the Chanukas HaMizbeach took place from Gimel Tishrei until Chav Gimel Tishrei. Why until Chav Gimel? We learned last week.
Chav Gimel Adar is going to be the
Chav Gimel, right? Exactly. Chav Gimel Adar. Correct. Right.
But so if that's the case, why does the lashon of the Navi say Vayasu v'nei Golos? But why didn't it say Vayikrubu? Yasu is almost like it's like they don't have the. Okay, we use the Mizbeach.
We find in the Chumash also Vayasu es Pasach, because it's not just a hakrava. You need to gather the. You have to. Right. There's a procedure. Okay. Now, how were they able to do this? Pasuk Chav ki hitaru hakohanim v'alavim ke'echad, because the kohanim and Levim purified themselves together. Kulam taharim. They were all tahar. Now, that's also an unusual expression. Why? What's the emphasis that they purify themselves as one, all being tahar? What do you need an achdus in tahara for? I mean, just say, if you want to say they were tahar, so they say they became tahar. We'll see. Vayishchatu ha-pesach l'chol b'nei hagoyla, they shechted the pesach for everyone, v'la'acheim ha-kohanim, and for their brothers the kohanim, v'lahem, and for themselves.
So that's also redundancy. L'chol b'nei hagoyla certainly includes acheim ha-kohanim v'lahem.
In other words, not only they brought it for them and for the kohanim. Let's see the Malbim. The Malbim says, Ki hitoharu ha-kohanim v'alavim ke'echad. Says the Malbim, L'umas mashakasav Ezra b'divrei hayamim beis. This is in contradistinction to what it says about Ezra and Divrei Hayamim beis. It says, Ki halavim yishrei leiv lehiskadesh mehakohanim. I believe this is describing what it says about the times of Chizkiah HaMelech. In the times of Chizkiah HaMelech, when Chizkiah reversed the policies of his father Achaz and he removed the Avodah Zarah from the temple, so it says there many people brought karbanos, but there were not enough kohanim to be able to fulfill the avodah and be able to perform the avodah. But here it's saying that this time the kohanim got their act together and they were equal parties and they were involved in the hakrava. Amar sha'ata yitaru ke'echad v'lo yitar meshenishru gam kohanim levim tmeim kulam tahirim.
Rabbi, the question, it's very strange to me. If you look at all of Sukkim before Pasuk Yud, including Pasuk Yud, you have the lashon that Ezra has been using all along, which is a kind of Aramaic. But all of a sudden, by Pasuk Yud, through and including Pasuk Chav Beis, this is like regular Ivrit that we know from the Torah. And then it starts again with the lashon of Ezra. What happened here? It's almost like somebody else wrote this. Well, it's not the same. Clearly, not the same flow.
Okay, good.
I mean, this almost looks like it was written. You could use this as a Haftorah. You know, I mean, it's clearly the regular kind of lashon, and it's just remarkable.
Okay, good observation. So apparently, part of the reason why this is written in Aramaic is because it's describing what's taking place in Paras, in Madai, in Bavel. And the Jews, until they complete the Beis HaMikdash, it's almost as if, they have not fully returned back to Eretz Yisrael. And now that they've reached the pinnacle of accomplishment, in other words, they've built the Beis HaMikdash, they've even offered the Karban Pesach. By the way, the Karban Pesach is a carbon which is supposed to remove Klal Yisrael from any vestige of idolatrous influence, perhaps. So maybe now we've completely removed ourselves from the Goyim. Now we could again use the Lashon HaKodesh.
Then it goes back right away.
No. So there also I see that it's still a Lashon HaKodesh until Pasuk Yud Aleph over there, and we'll see there why, because that's going to be a letter from Daryavesh, who obviously right. Okay, so let's see. So they bring the Karban Pesach and they all purify together. Now the Malbim points out that the ones who really took the initiative here were the Levium. The Levium took more of an initiative than the Kohanim. How do we see that? That the way the Malbim reads the pasuk Ki taru hakahanim halavim ke'echad kulam tarim vayishchatu, and they slaughtered. Who's the they? The Levim slaughtered for all the Yisraelim, and for the Kohanim, Vilohem, and for them. In other words, who is in charge of shechting the Karban Pesach here? Levim. The Levim. And
because the Bnei Israel weren't Torah yet.
No. Because as the Malbim points out, we find often in Divrei Hayamim that the Levim took initiative to be the sheichtim, and this is just a reflection of their zrizos. Now it's going to be interesting that the Kohanim were a little bit lax in coming back. We'll see. We're going to see. But here at least we're praising who? We're praising the Levim. So, you read this pasuk, you say, they shechted for the Bnei Agayla and the Kohanim, and for them, who's the them? So Malbim said, the Levim. Chaf Aleph, Vayochlu Bnei Yisrael hashavim mei Agayla. The Bnei Yisrael ate, who returned from the Agayla. V'choel hanivdal mitumas goyei haaretz aleim. And everyone who separated themselves from the impurity of the nations of the world, Lidroish Lashem Lekei Yisrael, to seek out Hashem, the God of Israel. Now, what does this mean? V'chol hanivdal mitumas goyei haaretz, and anyone who's separated from the impurities of the nations of the world. So, is this talking about goyim who are now refraining from idolatry? Says Rashi, this refers to gerim. Look at Rashi Chaval v'chol hanivdal heim hagerim. These are the gerim shenivdalu mitumas ha'ovdei kachamim, who are separating from the impurity of the goyim lidavek b'Yisrael. So Rashi learns this refers to gerim.
Rabbi.
Yes.
But a ger has to be one that was nivdalu mitumas of the chachamim, lived of Israel. I mean, if you're a ger, that's obvious.
Correct. In other words, this is pasuk is saying there are people who converted.
So it doesn't say gerim.
That's the way of saying it. Now I would say, right, maybe it's talking about a ger. No, it can't be a ger toisha because they don't need to come Pesach.
Right.
So it has to be a full-fledged ger, and that's what the Malbim also says. It's referring to gerim. That's what the Ibn Ezra says in his first pshat. Or the Ibn Ezra says it's referring to Yidden, Jews, who perhaps they marry non-Jews in the Goyla, and now that the Klal Yisrael is having an ascendancy, they're jumping on the bandwagon. Okay. Vayasu Chag Matzah Shivas Yomim B'Simcha. They celebrated the Yom Tif of Pesach with joy. Why? Ki Simcha Hashem. Because
Shivas Yomim.
Yeah, Vayasu Chag Matzah Shivas Yomim B'Simcha. They celebrated Pesach 7 days in joy. Ki simcha Hashem. God made them rejoice. V'heisev leiv melech Ashur aleim. And God influenced the heart of the king of Ashur. L'chazik yedehem, to strengthen their efforts. B'mleches beis halakim, in constructing the Beis Hamikdash of Hashem Elokei Yisrael. Now this is very curious. So apparently, we have sound effects of building the Beis Hamikdash as we're learning. Right?
We had to move yesterday because of this.
Okay, so Rabbi say it's very interesting that the pasuk says Hashem influenced the heart of Melech Ashur. Now, usually when we talk about Melech Ashur, who is that referring to? Sancherib, Melech Ashur. We know that more than 100 years before the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, Ashur exiled the Aseres Hashvatim. Okay. Now, are the Aseres Hashvatim returning now? Are the Aseres Hashvatim returning now? The Ramban learns for the most part, no. Only Yehuda, Binyamin, and maybe a few select, random, miscellaneous from other Shvatim. So what? Hashem is influencing Sancherib? Sancherib's long gone. What does it mean Hashem is influencing the king of Ashur to assist the Bnei Israel? First of all, Ashur is long defeated. Ashur is not an empire anymore. Who's reigning the world now? Daryavesh.
But it doesn't say V'heisev Melech Ashur. It says Leiv Melech Ashur. I mean, it's kind of
he's influencing their hearts. Fine, but who is the Melech Ashur? Who is it referring to? And anyway, the Melech Ashur has no power now. There is no Ashur now.
The ideology of Melech Ashur.
So, the Ramban learns that when it talks about Melech Ashur here, it's referring to Daryavesh.
Really?
Why is he called Melech Ashur? Because Daryavesh, the Malchus Paras, conquered Assyria, took over Assyria, and assumed the role of king of Ashur also. Others also say that this is referring to Daryavesh. Now, why would we refer to him as king of Ashur? He's not the king of Ashur, he's king of Paras. So look at the Ralbag. The Ralbag says, look in the Ibn Ezra. Melech Ashur. Hu artach shashta. V'hizker Ashur v'lei Paras. Why is it called Ashur, not Paras? Ki malchei Ashur hechrivu Eretz Yisrael. Hashem is saying, take that. In other words, we're pointing out the irony, the poignancy of what's happening here. Because at the end of the day, Daryavesh is ruling over Ashur. So why are we calling him Melech Ashur in this case? To show Ashur is the one who exiled us, and look how the Rebbeinu Shalom manipulates history. Wow. Now he's turning their heart to build the Beis HaMikdash. That's why we refer to him in this instance as Melech Ashur. Ki malchei Ashur hechrivu Eretz Yisrael. V'ata hasev libay minach shavta yara l'toiva. V'zeh tam l'chazek yadeim. Okay, so very interesting. Okay. Now, the pasuk continues, right? That's the end of Perek Vav. So in other words, according to the Ibn Ezra, Perek Vav ends in complete circle. Ashur exiled us, and the Rebbeinu Shalom says, you think it's politics? You know, everybody gets caught up in politics. You know, whoa, what's the king going to do? What's the president going to do? Who should we vote for? Yeah, it's important. You have to do hishtadlus. But it's very interesting. You know, if you look in the Gemara in Chulin, talks about Esther minat Torah minayin, right? V'anochi haster asas panay. Haman minat Torah minayin, hamin ha'etz, right? So we get Mordechai minat Torah minayin, morderar. Why doesn't the Gemara ask Achashverosh minat Torah minayin? The Gemara is not interested in finding any allusion to Achashverosh in the Torah. Isn't that interesting? You would think you're learning Megillas Esther, so who are the main characters? Mordechai and Esther against Haman and Achashverosh. And even when we learn different Ramazim, right? 54 times Haman in the Megillah, 54 times Esther in the Megillah. 4 times Zeresh, so 54 and 4 is 58. 58 times Mordechai. 2 times Memucha and 2 times Hadassah. So it almost seems like, who are the main characters? Esther, Mordechai, Haman, even Zeresh. Who's Achashverosh? I don't know who Achashverosh is. He's like a footnote. Or you have the idea in Shoshanas Yaakov, right? Shoshanas Yaakov, Oror Haman, Baruch Mordechai, Ora Rura Zeresh, Brucha Esther, V'gam Charvoino Zochot. Why don't we say one word about Achashverosh, please? What, he doesn't exist?
Well, maybe he's not one of the ones that has a pair to show him the Hefkachol.
But what is he? Why don't we mention him in the Gemara? Why do we don't look for a remez for Achashverosh in the Gemara? Right? The Gemara doesn't say Achashverosh min Torah minayin. We don't talk about him in Shoshanas Yaakov. He's not. We don't cheshbenois how many times his name appears. So I heard a very interesting idea, and that is, people get very caught up in politics. Who's going to be the next president? What's he going to decide? A president, a king, is just a tool in the hand of Hashem. Now, everybody's a tool in the hand of Hashem, but more than anybody else, Leiv Malachim Biyad Hashem. And it's almost as if when it comes to politics, especially to the king of a country, the Rebbeinu Shalom has a tremendous sense of humor, where the Rebbeinu Shalom manipulates them like water. Leiv Malachim. Yeah. So Achashverosh, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? He's just Hashem's, hammer. He's just Hashem's tool. He's good when we're good. He's bad when we're bad. He's not somebody who's really exercising free will. Should I be good to the Jews? Should I be bad to the Jews? You see, the guy is so fickle-minded. He sways in the wind. One day he says, "Yeah, kill the Jews." The next day he says, "Yeah, do whatever you want. The Jews, you kill your enemies." So what is he? The answer is he's nothing. He's a feather in the wind. He's whatever the Rebbeinu Shalom wants him to be.
And everybody else is not. I mean,
but the concept is Leiv Malachim B'Yad Hashem. So as much as Hashem manipulates people to fulfill the tachlis in the world, but a king, so to speak, is on a completely different level. He is manipulated more than anybody else. You know, the Harry Truman, right? He's the first president of the United States to recognize.
He was the president,
right?
But he was the first to recognize.
He was the first world leader, I believe, and certainly president of the United States to recognize Israel. Why?
Hashem wanted it that way.
Right, because he loved Jews. He's Mamish and Oiv Yisrael.
There's a new book out that says that he really didn't want to.
So what happened?
Tremendous pressure
from
a number of sources.
He had
sources, and Eddie Jacobson.
He had a friend, Eddie Jacobson, right?
Partner.
Who they opened up a hat store in Indianapolis together.
No, Independence, Missouri.
Right, Independence, Missouri. Correct. Independence, Missouri. Correct. You're right. Right, Independence, Missouri, a haberdashery, right, which was a complete abysmal failure. So, you know, like anybody who fails at anything, if you're a complete failure in something, what do? Go into politics, right? Because, you know, if you can't be competent in anything, you might as well become a president of the United States. So he becomes president of the United States. He comes from a very simple beginning. And the guy who he sold hats with said, you know what, maybe you should recognize the state of Israel. It's like comedy. Right? Who convinced him to recognize the state of Israel? Some guy who was selling hats. You know, unfortunately, there's no yeshiva next to the hat store, so the hat store had to close down. Right? But that's why yeshiva bachrim, the world over, they show their hakar satay by wearing borsalinos. But it's comical. It's comical.
His house that he lived in Independence, Missouri, is today a historic landmark, but his wife is known not to let a Jew cross the threshold of that house.
Wow.
When they lived there.
Wow.
It's a bavusta fact. She was very hostile to Jews, and even in the face of that, he went into partnership. She came from a very well-to-do family, and he was a simple farm. He came from a farm family, and irrespective of his wife's hostility and her family's hostility to Jews, he befriended and became partners with this Eddie Jacobson, whom he respected as a very straight-shooting, honest fellow.
You have the son of the Tsar, right? Instead of when he took over at a young age, so he could have used his father's advisors. Instead, who's his advisor? Rasputin, right? Who's some kook. The guy's he's a kook. He's a nutcase, right? He wore a wizard's hat. You could look in history. He wore a wizard's hat. He was, some mystical healer. Today we would call him a makubal, and he was a kook. He was a kook. He was a kook, and that ensured that the power of the Tsar would go down the tubes. Because instead of having a sane advisor, he was advised by some guy. He looks like he's out of a comic book. So when it comes to malachim, kings, they're mamish feathers in the wind. So Achashverosh, do we talk about him? No. What do you mean? We don't need to know Achashverosh from that Torah Minayin. Achashverosh is not a player in the Purim story.
Did we say the same about...
So that's the pasuk we just read. Melech Ashur, look at Ashur. They were the ones who kicked you out of Israel, and now they're building the Beis HaMikdash. Right?
Did we say the same thing about Lev Malachim with respect to David and Shlomo and Tzidkiyahu and the kings that were known to be very positive factors in Jewish history? I mean,
well, it depends.
One, I assume it applies to all.
Okay, that's an interesting thing. In terms of things that they did good, that they accomplished, that's given to their own credit, that they're accredited with. But in terms of how major events play out, in terms of world politics, the king is really a tool. So yeah, we try to vote for the person who would be best for us. We try to do our hishtadlus. But at the end of the day, the politics game is very immature for somebody to be so hooked on, who is it going to be? Who it's going to be? You daven, you learn. Rebbeinu Shalom could move anybody. Melech Ashur could be building your Beis HaMikdash. Daryavish could be building your Beis HaMikdash. If you don't do the right thing, Hashem could take a good guy, and Daryavish will go sour. We'll see. Darius goes sour. Okay, so let's see now, Pasuk Zayin. So again, Rabbi say, we're in Nisan of what year of Daryavesh? Well, we know Adar was the 6th year. If he's a Jewish king, that Nisan will be the 7th year. If he's a Jewish king, right? If he's a Jewish king, that will be the 7th year. If he's a Goyish king, it will still be the 6th year. V'yachar hadvarim ha'ela, and after these matters, the Malchus, in other words, after the Binyan Habayis, the Malchus Artaxshasta, during the reign of Artaxshasta, Melech Paras, the king of Paras, Ezra, ben Seraya, ben Azariah, ben Chilkiah, ben Shalom, ben Tzadok, ben Achitov, ben Amariah, ben Azariah, ben Meroyos, ben Zerachia, ben Uzi, ben Buki, ben Avishua, ben Pinchas, ben Elazar, ben Aaron HaKoyin HaRosh, who was the son of Aaron HaKoyin, the first Koyin, who Ezra Olam Bavel. Ezra went up to Bavel. So you should know, Ezra did not build the Beis HaMikdash. Why not? Says the Gemara Masechta Megillah, Ezra had something more important to do. And what is that? He was learning Torah. Who is he learning Torah from? His Rabbi Baruch ben Neriah. What? Learning Torah is more important than building the Beis HaMikdash? Of course. Of course it is. You know, you get a phone call. Oh, I have a great mitzvah to do. You couldn't imagine who we could go. Beautiful. I'm doing a bigger mitzvah. Sorry, you know. Talk to you later. But Beis HaMikdash, Eretz Yisrael. So the question is, why didn't his Rebbe go up? His Rebbe was too old. Baruch ben Neriah, the Medrash in Shar Shirim, says he was too old. He was too weak. So Ezra didn't leave him. Now, the Gemara says that this is a year after the last Nisan, a year after the first Karban Pesach.
Means Achar Dvarim is a year later.
Achar Dvarim is a year later. Now you should know that even though we're chronicling the history of Ezra, nevertheless, it's missing 6 generations. Between Azariah and Marios. Between Azariah and Marios, there were 6 generations. But
so Chilkiyahu was not the father of Azariah?
No. Ben Azariah and Marios, the second Azariah. Ben Azariah, Ben Marios, there were 6 generations. Why? Well, basically, the point here is just to trace Ezra back to Aaron HaKohen. We don't have to go through all generations. Right. Now, it's very interesting. If you look in Masechta Brachos, when they deposed Ram Gamliel and they were looking for a new Nasi, so they said, should we appoint Rabbi Yeshua? No, he's the Baal Maisa. Should we appoint Rabbi Akiva? He doesn't have Zchus Avos. Who should we appoint? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Why? Because he's a Talmid Chacham, he's wealthy, and he's 10th generation from Ezra HaSofer. So it's interesting. His name was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So you see, Azariah was a very common name in the family, right? We see a couple of them in these generations. Now, the Gemara and San...
He was a Kohen. He was also a Kohen.
He was a Kohen also, yes. Rabbi Sai.
So the bigger yichus would have been bad for Aaron, the resident.
Okay, but that's, right? Once you're going back that far, everybody has, right? The Gemara Masechta Sanhedrin Chafal from Abayz makes an analogy between who Ezra Allah mi Bavel and who Moshe Allah el Halakim. Says the Gemara, Ezra was right that the Torah could have been given through him. The only thing is Moshe beat him to the chase. Moshe got there before. But Ezra was, nobody from Moshe to Ezra was as right to give the Torah to the Jewish people. Now, the Maharsha explains what's the inyan of the comparison between the Allah of Moshe and the Allah of Ezra. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu ascended to the heaven to be able to attain great Chachma, so too Ezra ascended to also a new atmosphere. He also ascended Hakol Oila mi Bavel Eretz Yisrael. He ascended to Eretz Yisrael to be able to achieve greatness in Torah knowledge. By the way, we once explained from the Baal HaLeshem that Ezra really was the beginning of the Torah Sheba'al Peh in terms of the Gzeros Chachamim. This is the point in history where they start to decree on the bread of Goyim, the wine of Goyim, the oil of Goyim, making sure Jews don't intermarry, because until this time we're going to see Ezra comes up, he says, what's going on here? the Jews, they don't know anything. They don't even know about Sukkot. Many Jews were intermarried, and it was because they did not have the safeguards of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And Ezra, so to speak, is initiating the era of the Gzeros Chachamim. So the same way Moshe gave Klal Yisrael the Torah, Ezra also ushered in an era of giving of the Torah. Okay? Who Ezra Olam Bavel? This is the Ezra that went up from Bavel. V'hu Sofer. What's a Sofer? Literally a scribe. However, it says V'hu Sofer Maher. He was a very studious, he was a very quick and fast and alert scribe. But look what it says. The Torah of Moshe and the Torah of Moshe. What does it mean, a scribe in the Torah of Moshe? Should say, maybe of the Torah of Moshe. So you have to know the word Sofer doesn't always mean scribe. For example, thank you. In the pasuk, La Yasser Shevet Mi Yehuda Umechaykek Mi Bein Raglav. The Targum says Umechaykek V'Safra. Safra could mean a scholar. The Safra could mean a scholar.
See, I think the Evan Ezra touches that he's Mesafer b'Mispar b'Mehirus. Because he tells stories and he quickly describes halachos or whatever. Now, he was very well versed in Torah's motion.
Okay, so good. We're going to see that. He knew the precise number of words and letters, and he was able to correct the newer editions of the Torah from the errors that had crept in. Okay, Asher Nasan Hashem Lekei Yisrael, that Hashem, the God of Israel, gave. Vayiten Lai Hamelech, and the king gave him Kiyad Hashem Leikav Alav. Whatever Hashem wanted for him, Kal Bakashasai, all of his requests. In other words, the king granted him all of his requests according to the command of Hashem.
This is Daryavesh, is this not?
Look at Rashi. Vayiten Lai Hamelech Daryavesh. Kiyad Hashem Leikav Alav, like Hashem had commanded regarding him. Now, who is Ezra? Who is he? Who is Ezra? So you say, what do you mean who he is? He's Ezra. Who's anybody? So Gemara says that Ezra is Malachi. The Gemara Megillah says Ezra was Malachi. And the Gemara learns that out because we know Malachi complains and criticizes that the Jews were intermarried. And Ezra, more than anybody else, was the one who tried to fix that issue. And from there, the Gemara at least brings down one position, that Ezra was Malachi.
But Malachi was much later on, no?
Well, Malachi was the last of the Nevi'im. So think about it. Ezra is already in the second Beis HaMikdash. Soon we're going to be having Tanoim. He's the last of the Anshe Knesset Agdana and one of the last of the Nevi'im.
It still could be, Malachi could have been a couple of hundred years later.
Well,
yeah, the last Beis HaMikdash was the last of 400 years.
Okay, but still, Ezra is from the last of the Nevi'im, according to this. What? So, but we're just saying Ezra was Malachi. Ezra was Malachi.
Do we know how long Ezra lived? Does it say anywhere?
If I'm not mistaken, he lived 120 years. But I have to double check that.
To dovetail that with him being the last of the Nevi'im.
Why?
Because he was alive before the Beis HaMikdash.
Okay.
Sheni was built. So let's say he was 30 or 40. Means he was 80 years into the second Beis HaMikdash. So Malachi would have been much later on.
No. Chanukah, which happened during Bayis Sheni, was already after the period of the Nevi'im. Right? That's why Chanukah was never canonized. The book of the Maccabees is not allowed in the Tanakh. Why? The Nevuah had already ceased. Nevuah had ceased. In fact, the Anshe Knesset Agdol, when they davened for Avodah Zarah to stop, because Nevuah was stopping, so they figured once Nevuah is stopping, we'll abolish Avodah Zarah. Okay. Vayalu mibnei Yisrael, they went up from the Bnei Yisrael, min HaKohanim, the Halavim, the HaMeshoyrim, the singers, the HaShoyarim, and the gatekeepers, the Hanasinim, El Yushalayim, Bishnas Sheva Le'artachshas Hamelech, in the 7th year. What do you mean the 7th year? But it says, Vayava Yerushalayim b'chodesh hachamishi. They came to Yerushalayim in the 5th month, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz, Av. Hishnas Hashviyas HaMelech. That's the 7th year of the king.
Oh, that means he was a Jewish king, right?
So wait a second. We just learned in Parak Vav, Pasuk Tes Vav, that the Beis Hamikdash was completed on the 3rd day of Adar of the 6th year.
6 months. 6 years.
And then in Nisan, which if he would be a Jewish king, they brought the Karban Pesach. And a year later, Ezra came up, which should be the 8th year, if he's a Jewish king. But if you say he's a Goyish king, listen to this, then in Adar of the 6th year, they finished the Beis Hamikdash. Nisan is still the 6th year.
Av is still the 6th year.
Right? Nisan the next year is 7th. And Av is still the 7th year. So the Gemara says from here, even though in Sefer Chagai we count him like a Jewish king, here we're obviously counting him like a Goyish king, and that shows Daryavesh went sour. Now, what did he do exactly that he went sour? Either, like we had earlier, he had ulterior motives in building the Beis Hamikdash. He wanted the Jews to pray for his welfare, and this ulterior motive was considered very inappropriate. Or he only allowed them to build the walls of the Beis Hamikdash with wood, so that if need be, he could burn it down. Or he had a shegal, which is a female dog who sat next to him, with who he did immoral activities. Okay, but either way, the Gemara derives from here that Daryavesh, went on the wrong path. Okay, Ki b'yachad lachodesh harishayin, hu yusad, on the first day of the first month, it was founded. Now, what was founded? Oh, excuse me. Ki b'yachad lachodesh harishayin hu yusad. On the first day of the first month, he began his ascent. Hu yusad hamala mi Bava. That's when he began his ascent from Bava. U'b'yachad lachodesh hachamishi on Rosh Chodesh Av, ba'al Yerushalayim. He came to Yerushalayim. Ki yad Elokav hatoiva olav. Like the hand of Hashem that was good to him.
This is Ezra's talking about.
Right. Now I find it very interesting that at the beginning of the parak it traces him back to who? Who's Ezra traced back to?
Aaron.
Aaron HaKohen. And when does he arrive in Yerushalayim?
Rosh Chodesh Av.
What's Rosh Chodesh Av?
Aaron's Patira.
The yard side of Aaron HaKohen. Yeah. The yard side of Aaron HaKohen passed away, Rosh Chodesh Av. So here, the beginning of the parak is tracing back to Aaron. And look, lo and behold, he returns to Yerushalayim, the descendant of Aaron HaKohen, on the yard side of Aaron HaKohen. Very interesting. Ki Ezra, why? Why was Ezra Zoicha to return and to restore the primacy, the importance of Klal Yisrael? Ki Ezra heichen levavai, because Ezra prepared his heart, lidrosh es Torahs Hashem, to seek out the Torah of Hashem v'lasais, and to perform ulalamed b'Yisrael, to teach Klal Yisrael chayk u'mishpat, statutes and justice. And because he prepared himself, says Rashi, v'alkein halach v'hitzliach v'darkai, because he prepared himself, he was successful in his journey, he was successful in his path, because Ezra was meichen levavai.
What does that mean, that he prepared himself to lasos chok mishpat? That he was going to be the head of the Sanhedrin?
No, but as we're going to see, he's going to be the one who really restores the Torah observance to the Jewish people, more than anybody else.
Well, chok mishpat is more judicial in language as opposed to, lishmor as mitzvos Hashem, or the
I'll tell you something, yeah.
the ways of Hashem, the darkei Hashem.
The Malbim learns, when we talk about Ezra, who Ezra, he says, who is the last remaining of the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah? Shimon HaTzadik haya mishiarei Knesset HaGdolah. Hu haya omer, Ashloisha dvarim ha'olam oimed, ala Torah, ala Avodah, v'agmos chasadim. Why? Why are the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah saying these three things? Because in the days of the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, these were the three areas of the Jewish people that were fortified. Through three people, Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel and Yeshua Kohen Gadol, they built the Beis HaMikdash. That fortified which pillar? Avodah. Then Ezra came and he fortified the Torah. Then Nehemiah came and he fortified the walls, and that's Gemilas Chasadim. So in other words, you had three sort of bodies of governing the Jewish people. You had Yoshua and Zerubbabel. They built the Beis HaMikdash. Ezra did not build the Beis HaMikdash. Ezra came up later to fortify Torah. Then Nehemiah fortified the walls of the city. And when it says that the king gave him whatever he wanted, that is, the king allowed him to fortify the Torah so the Torah should not be forgotten. Now, what does it mean? The Malbim says that he prepared his heart for three things. Number one, Lid Rosh Torah Hashem. That means he prepared himself to investigate and to ponder the Torah. Number two, to perform, Velasais, to actually keep the Torah. And number three, to teach others. So Rabbi said this is the main function of Ezra. Ezra did not build the Beis HaMikdash. It's not like Ezra had nothing to do with the Beis HaMikdash. Ezra fortified the Kabbalas HaTorah of Klal Yisrael in that Tekufa. Okay, Rabbi say, Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.